I've got about 36 slides I'm going to show you in about 15 minutes as soon as Eric brings them up. And then stick around at the end of this if anybody's got any questions they think me or one of my investigators can answer. Just like Janine said, N-bomb has came on with a heck of a force in the last couple years. It's been this rise of synthetic drug cases that we've seen too at DEA. But we'll talk about that. Let's talk about N-bomb. What is it? It goes by the name of Smiles. The upper right picture is just blotter paper, like Janine said. It's a big piece of paper perforated, where it's like 1/4 inch square, so you can pull off a little section. It's a hallucinogen, so it takes on the same effect as LSD. Right? It goes by different names. All those like 2,5-B, 2,5-C, 2,5-I are all very similar. They're a molecule or two apart. One of the challenges we face when a chemist makes a substance, he has to get it patented. It gets on the internet, and people copycat it and add a molecule or two. And that's exactly what N-bomb is, right? Synthesized by a German scientist back in 2003, 25 to 60 times stronger than LSD. So a much more potent substance than LSD. Has no legitimate use. Same effects as LSD and mescaline, so it's going to mess your mind up. It's going to give you one of those hallucinogenic type euphoric trips. Sold online. Every case we're working right now is internet-based, and you get these special deep web access. One's called the Onion router, things like that. You buy it in powder form, and then you soak it, as Janine said, into a liquid form, and you drip it onto the blotter paper, which I'm going to show you. One-time use can be deadly, and it affects kids all differently. Next slide. Here's what it looks like. Standard white powder. It's as simple as that. It looked like sugar or flour if you had it on your counter. That's a drug, a small white package. That can make thousands of dosage units. So a small amount can make many dosage units. Next slide. There's that blotter paper I talked about. See the size of the quarter? All those little blotter papers that you can rip off. Okay? And they come in all sorts of colorful shapes and sizes. Here's the next one. You can get on the internet and buy this stuff. It's all that stuff kind of marketed that attracts kids with the colors and the neat logos and things like that. That's blotter paper. That's all it is. Until you put the liquid N-bomb on it, it's nothing. Here's how you use it. A little bit on your tongue, okay? And it'll absorb right into your system. It affects all the kids a little bit different, but these are kind of the most common effects you're going to see. A red face, confused or combative, a fast heart rate, sweating, dilated pupils. Teeth grinding comes with a lot of hallucinogenics. It's like ecstasy when we used to see that 10 years ago. Possible seizures, numbing of mouth, bitter taste. And again, as I'm talking to parents and the kids that are here, one-time use like Sam and many of the others can kill you. Next slide. Who's it marketed to? Just like Janine said, the synthetics are going after our young kids, our most vulnerable right now. And I'll talk about the different drugs briefly. But a lot of them are sold like you can get by drug test. It's the new stuff. Many of our kids believe the pharmaceutical drugs are safer too because they're made by synthetics. So the kids have moved away from the plant-based drugs to all this synthetic stuff, which is actually more dangerous and deadly. Is it dangerous? Yes, it is. Janine touched on this already. N-bomb has caused numerous deaths. Here's an article, deaths in Arkansas, Minnesota, Arizona, Australia. So it's hit the U.S. and it's hit worldwide too. Next slide. Okay, what's DEA doing about it? Last November we scheduled it as a Schedule I substance. That means it has no legitimate medical value. Thankfully, Congress and the great lawmakers gave DEA the authority to emergency schedule drugs. There's a lot of checks and balances in Congress, but if we see drugs that have emerged on the market like N-bomb, some of these other drugs like bath salts and even spice and synthetic cannabinoids, We have the authority to emergency schedule it and make it illegal. It only lasts for 2 years, and then the FDA has to come in and more or less bless it or check mark it behind us, but it gives us a great tool. The only thing negative about it, we need deaths and things like that to do it, so it comes at a cost. You know, and too many kids died as a result of this. We documented 19 deaths between, I believe, March and August, and that gave us the authority to move against the drug. What are we doing investigative-wise? We're going after the drug dealers in China because most of it's coming out of China. Most of this is internet sold through FedEx and UPS right into the U.S. And that's what we're trying to blow up every day we work. Excellent. Okay, here's a quick tutorial. I'll make this quick. I'm 55 years old. I grew up in that 70 years. And that's where I started my work as a DEA agent. All I chased was cocaine, heroin, and meth. Guess what, though? That game's changed. Right now in the 2000s, the pharmaceutical drugs have taken over. We're fighting painkillers, right and left. But the most scariest one right now is the emerging synthetic drugs, and that's the N-bombs, the bath salts, the K2, the spice, and the other drugs. So the drug game, like America and the world, is evolving every day. What frustrates us DEA agents is a lot of people continue to fight in the plant-based drug area when actually these other two are just as dangerous, if not more deadly. And that's an area we continue to focus on. Next slide. Synthetics and plant-based drugs, what's the comparison? Both are dangerous for young adults because you're still growing up. You aren't reached maturity. It's all the East Coast and the West Coast states legalize marijuana. I just ask everybody to think long and hard about that, because when you talk to an addiction doctor, a medical doctor that treats addiction, he will say what I will say, and probably every one of these law enforcement. Everybody that starts on drugs starts with marijuana. Okay? They all do that, but everybody wants to legalize it. We're going down a bad road. If we could go back real quickly. Janine touched on this. She's well read on the subject. There's an unknown composition in these drugs. These drugs, like N-bomb, are made by some Chinese scientist in a backyard alley shipping them into America. There's no quality control. There's no studies done. There's no dosage unit, how much of what. And that explains how some kids can take it and some die. It's never been tested for human consumption. The FDA approves all our drugs. Okay? All this weird stuff has not been approved. And then we got to remember, and here's one to teach our kids, and as I wind this up, any drug, legal or not, if it's being misused, if you don't have a prescription, it can be very harmful, it can be deadly, and one-time use can kill you. Next slide. Other drug threats, we'll talk briefly. This is a big one too, synthetic cannabinoids. Some people call it synthetic marijuana. We know it as spice and K2. Senator Jim Merritt's been at the forefront of this. This is a molecule or two different, gives the effect of marijuana, but much purer, much higher dose, and you don't again know what you're taking. It isn't real marijuana. What it is think catnip or oregano leaves. It's called actually a damiami leaf, a special crushed up leaf, and they soak the chemical substance onto it again. That's how you make spice. So it isn't even marijuana you're smoking. It's some chemical dripped on oregano type substances. Okay, and kids have had seizures and done all sorts of weird things on it. Next slide. It's a psychoactive herbal and chemical product. The biggest names are K2 and spice, and again, it's marketed at our kids. All of the logos are very colorful, and they try and attract the kids. And then what we're doing is chasing it to some extent. We're making it illegal, and they'll change a molecule or two, and the battle continues. Next slide. How it's used, everybody smokes it. If you got synthetic cannabinoids, you're going to smoke it or you're going to run it through a ball. Next slide. Bath salts is another one. We're actually seeing a reduction in bath salts, again, sold in the head shops along with the synthetic cannabinoids. Next slide. It's kind of copycatted against cocaine. You don't even use it in your bathroom or anything like that. But it gives you a stimulant type hallucinogenic high. And and you'd either snort this predominantly. But luckily, we're not seeing as much as we have, luckily, to the laws. But there's about 3 different molecular structures of this. Next slide. Heroin, about 10 more slides here. Got a big problem with heroin. I'm going to show you some slides. Next slide. This is what heroin balloons look like if you were buying it in the city, in Indianapolis, little balloons for $10. Next slide. These are other photos. You might see a heroin, little crushed up baggies, little Ziploc baggies, and then once somebody starts snorting it, and if they start to inject it, you'll see a hypodermic needle and maybe a little bit of aluminum foil as they heat it up. Next slide. Why are we talking about heroin? We got a big prescription drug problem, mainly painkillers. The drugs are used interchangeably because you get the same high from them. Next slide. Latest thing that just came out last year, 80% of the new heroin users started with prescription painkillers. That's your Oxycontins, your oxycodones, your hydrocodones, etc. Next slide. This study came out in late 12, IU study. Indiana was second in the nation for prescription abuse rates. Next slide. Janine asked me to add these slides. Huey puts these slides out. Great researchers. The red line going across is the nationwide average of heroin use in America. Indiana's was fairly low, but as you can see, starting in 2008, it started to climb up. Next slide. This one shows it by sex. We work a lot of prescription painkiller cases. We too see more women use this than guys. But you can see the females outnumber the guys' usage by about 2 percentage points. Next slide. Heroin use by race, predominantly a white drug. When you look at that slide, the biggest increase is Caucasians. Next slide. And here's the age. Probably the scariest line is that blue line, starting in 2010, the under 18. We've almost been conditioned that there's a pill for every woe, and I think that's one of the many lessons we got to tell our kids. Some of these things in life you just got to fight through like we all have. Next slide. We'll run through these real quick just so the parents know. The most commonly abused pharmaceutical drugs across America. Next slide. Oxycodone's number 1, followed by hydrocodone, followed by Suboxone. These stats come from the DEA's big computer where we tally in all of the nation's drug crime labs. So all across America, the nation's drug crime labs are giving us their numbers. So this represents the common drugs law enforcement encounters on the street that they turn into the crime lab for analysis. Next slide. Benzodiazepines, these are those anti-anxiety drugs. These are the top 2, Xanax and Klonopin. We see a lot of those too. Next slide. This just came out last month. Indiana's in the Rust Belt, and as you can see, all that dark blue is the number of painkiller prescriptions per 100 people. You can see we have a lot more than the other states. And from that, we have a lot more deaths and a lot more of these issues with heroin too, because they cross-relate. Next slide. The Indiana versus nation painkiller use, probably the most remarkable is that 18 to 25-year-old were slightly higher by 3.5 percentage points than the U.S. average on painkillers. We've got to teach our kids to back away from these pills. Next slide. Okay, 3 last slides here. I got these from drugfree.org, the Partnership for a Drug-Free America. I'm a parent of 2 daughters, and I worry about it just like everybody sitting in this room and their kids. They actually have a parent toolkit. Drug-Free America, that's the website, the best website, best organization to help parents, a parent toolkit. I pulled these from the toolkit, 3 slides. Don't speak generally about drug and alcohol use. You need to hear detailed and reality-driven messages, okay? My daughter told me the other day a kid at Cathedral High School passed away from an oxycodone drug overdose who was going to IU, and she knew him from a friend. So 20-year-old kid coming from a great school like Center Grove, but up in Cathedral, died of an overdose too, okay? So it's out there, it happens every day. You got to tell your kids these stories and sit down at the supper table, like the sheriff said, and talk to your kids. Emphasize what drugs can do. 40 years ago, my mom sat me down and said, hey, if you go down the wrong road, you'll never be able to become a policeman or a DEA agent like you want to be. I tell my kids that. One wants to be a doctor, and I'm not sure what the other one wants yet, but it's like you can screw up at a young age and it'll hurt you. You got to remember that. Next slide. Challenge your kid to be a leader. Okay? We all want that from our kids, but we got to challenge them. Encourage your kids to volunteer and see some of these side effects. These are all in this parent toolkit, and they have them. The Drug Free America has them right down the age bracket, from 6 to 8, from 8 to 10. What a great website. Next slide. Use news reports. We talk long and hard. My kids have heard me preach about the dangers of prescription drug abuse. And we sat for 30 minutes, an hour. He's talking about that young guy that died from that oxycodone. His heart just stopped beating, and that's what the painkillers do. And then if you mix it with alcohol, it's almost a guaranteed death. And then lastly, compliment your teams. We all need a pickup at times. Sometimes we know what it's like to grow up and being a kid's tough nowadays. But compliment your team, reassure them, and be there. And like the second sentence from the bottom says, teens still care what their parents think. So we got to support them, but we got to be on them too.